Hello, maybe I start. My name is Inge Günther from Frankfurter Rundschau. I would like to ask both of you, I mean, how would it been possible to avoid the situation as it is now? You said the US with the hasty withdrawal or the decision for hasty withdrawal caused a lot of problems, but do you think it would have been possible if they stayed longer and just would whatever proceed to a different process? The things would be different right now. I mean, also the UdSSR before they had also their bad experience in Afghanistan. So maybe say what would have been necessary in your mind.
I would say that the one of the most significant differences that could have occurred was to have somehow got Pakistan to stop supporting the Taliban. I think without Pakistan's support, the Taliban could not have carried out as powerful a campaign as it did. And although, you know, in many cases, Taliban fighters simply melted back into their villages, there was a lot of logistic support and resupply from Pakistan, which was a safe haven for the Taliban. And sometimes the Pakistani army used its own helicopters, etc., to support the Taliban. I think that, you know, that was one of the fundamental things that could have, if that had happened, then we wouldn't be probably in the situation we are now. And secondly, I think the government of Afghanistan was fundamentally corrupt. It did not command the allegiance, as I mentioned, of many of the regional governors, did not command the allegiance of its own army. And a lot of that happened, you know, after the early days of our involvement in Afghanistan, when the German army was there, we were there, the Americans were there, a number of others were there. The government of Afghanistan was controlled mainly by the Americans, and President Karzai responded to direction from the Americans, but fairly quickly the Americans wanted to release control of the country to what was the sovereign government of Afghanistan, but that was a fundamental mistake. Now, unfortunately, allowing the Afghan government to operate very independently has led to where we're at today as well. And it does sound like kind of advocating an imperialistic policy where the US maintained control of the government in Afghanistan, but I think that was necessary given the massive transition that occurred from being effectively a jihadist controlled state, transitioning from that to dictatorship, transitioning from that into democracy, not something that happened for a space of time. So I think different forms of interaction with the Afghan government would have made a difference. And I think, you know, people talk about 20 years being a long time. It is a long time, but it's a big problem. We've had, you know, there were Allied forces based in Germany after the Second World War for many years, and even today there are still Western forces, although it's not anything to do with the Second World War today. But that's the reality. In Korea, US forces are still based there, even though the war ended, or there was an armistice in the war back in the 50s. The same is true in Cyprus. We still have British and other UN forces deployed in Cyprus decades after the conflict there. So some of these conflicts, unfortunately, take a long time and a lot of commitment to resolve. And in fact, to retain the level of military commitment that existed in Afghanistan up until very recently was not a huge commitment from any country, not really. It was comparatively small. I think it should have been a bit bigger, but it was still comparatively small. And then in terms of the immediate decisions and actions, I think if the president decided to withdraw, I think he should have certainly done it over a more protracted period. You know, I'm not saying in that, I'm talking about he's decided to withdraw. You can't then just do that as he did and expect much other than what we had. by an immediate withdrawal, as we saw.
I will just say that you cannot come up with a time limit until which you're going to withdraw, because this is a self-defeating policy. It's if you put any other kind of criteria saying if the government functions this way, that way, if it shows its capability, and then we shall withdraw, it's something different. And it's not going to happen anytime soon anyhow, because as Richard said, it takes a very long time to change a culture. And this was not done properly. And this nowism of let's withdraw now as soon as possible is self-defeating. And that is what happened. And there can be no surprise with these developments.
Okay, I have a question here. Can you tell us more on eventual messages, direct or indirect, passed between the Gulf states and Israel in the wake of the fall of Kabul? What do you expect to be the most important cooperation between the Gulf states and Israel now?
Well, I don't know of any exchange, because I'm not in the government now. But definitely, I think that the Gulf states and Israel see the same picture and have the same concerns about what's going on. We are concerned that radical Islamist groups are going to have this event as a reason for blowing air in their sails and blowing wind in their sails, and that's what's bothering everybody. They're going to feel emboldened and try to carry out more attacks and have more influence in the region. And this includes both the Sunni radical groups and the Shiite radical groups and those groups that are cooperating with Iran. So both the Gulf states and Israel are pretty much concerned about it. There was a visit here of the Bahraini deputy foreign minister last week. His concerns were well described when he was saying that he's concerned about what's happening in Afghanistan and what's happening with Iran, especially with the American attitude. He expressed a lot of concern about the American attitude. So it's, and I think Israel feels the same. I don't know if there were messages going from one side to another, but definitely we have a very similar view. And I hope, as I said before, that this will bring more people into the understanding that all those who are concerned have to stick together in order to be more capable to confront the coming threats because of this move.
Richard, do you have anything to add to this?
Nothing to add to that.
Okay. Do we have questions? Okay, there is a question here. Kuber Wasser, you said that the US is an ally to Israel, but Israel should count on itself. Does this change anything on the ground in terms of decision making?
Well, you know, it doesn't change anything on the ground because this is our policy. This has been our policy always. But, for example, on the question of what are we going to do about Iran, it is something that has to be translated into a new or different reality, because we keep saying that we are preparing ourselves to be able to protect ourselves against any threat coming from Iran anyhow, and we are doing a lot on ourselves. And we have a totally different attitude to that of the Americans, and we keep hitting, according to foreign press, we keep hitting Iranian targets in Syria and so on and so forth. But still, we promise to coordinate a lot of our activities, maybe even all of them, in this respect with the Americans. And knowing that the Americans are very, very cautious now, we have to be more able and spend more money in creating the capabilities, building the capabilities to protect ourselves by ourselves in the Iranian context. I think the decision has been taken beforehand because we knew that the Americans are going to leave Afghanistan. We knew that the Americans are adopting a policy that lowers their superpower profile in the Middle East. But at the same time, it was not clear that this is actually the policy. I think now we should be clearer. The same, you know, the same was in the context of the Palestinian issue. It's, in 2013, when we had discussions with the Americans about the Obama proposal, some people in the Israeli officialdom were ready to consider this idea of having foreign powers, foreign forces involved in providing security from in the context of the Palestinian threat. I think by now it's clear that's not going to happen. I want to add another thing here. This move is irreversible in a way. I mean, if what is going to happen is what Richard said is going to happen, that Afghanistan will become again jumping board for carrying out terror attacks around the world by groups like ISIS or whatever. No one will take seriously the option of recapturing Afghanistan. So the threat coming now from areas controlled by radical Islamists is bigger than it was in 2001, because it's there's not going to be another attempt to take over Afghanistan, and this is something that is really problematic.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think there's absolutely no prospect of a re-engagement in Afghanistan certainly by the US or the UK, and probably by no Western forces at all. I think, although it was a US decision, which the UK protested about to a small extent, I think in reality the UK government was very relieved by the decision being taken, even though it's developed in the way it has, because I think they were desperate to be out of the place anyway. It's been a long time, and it's cost, a lot of lives and political capital, as well as a lot of money. And I think they were quite happy to go. So they certainly would not, I don't believe, in Britain, follow the Americans in again. And I don't believe the Americans would go in again anyway. It would take something, I suppose, along the lines of, or maybe bigger than 9/11. And even then, I think, the likelihood of a significant ground intervention would be limited. And I think General Kukovac also made a really good point. He made many really good points, but he made a really good point, I thought, when he spoke about Israel defending itself and protecting itself. And it came to mind to me, which he touched on, the Kerry plan, which the military element of which was written by General John Allen, a US Marine Corps general, which called for US forces to be deployed in Judea and Samaria in place of Israeli forces. And, I think one of the reasons why that would have been so ridiculous a proposal to accept, yet it was laid to Israel with a straight face by America, was that if America had decided to withdraw, and it would have done in the same way as it's done in Afghanistan, if there were casualties or a change of political party or whatever in government, it certainly would have done. And then it would have been impossible, not impossible, it wouldn't have been impossible, it would have happened, but it would have been extremely difficult for Israel to then reinsert themselves into an independent Palestinian state, had that come about. So I think this situation really does underline the wisdom of Israel in rejecting any of that sort of proposal.
Do we have questions? Anything to add, Richard and Kuberwasser, before we stop?
I don't think so. I think I think there is enormous confusion in Kabul at the moment, and my understanding is there is while the military side of the airport there is currently being secured by US, UK, and maybe other forces as well, the civilian side is in a state of chaos, and I suspect that will go on for some time as people try desperately to get out. And there's a delegation, I'm not sure if it's still there, was a delegation went yesterday led by Abdullah Abdullah to Doha to agree the terms of the Taliban will be taking over. And I suspect it will be quite soon that we will see the outline of where the immediate future lies for Afghanistan. But I have to say I'm far from optimistic about that. And indeed, as I mentioned, I'm deeply concerned about the impact globally from, again, probably not right away in the short term, but the longer term global impact on the terrorist threat from the situation in Afghanistan.
Kuber Vassar, you have anything to add?
No, well, we always try to hope for a better future, but right now it's difficult to see a better future for Afghanistan. We will have to live with the consequences of this American unilateral decision.
Okay, I would like to thank you both speakers, Kuber Vassar and Richard, for being with us, and thank you, journalists. And I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.